response video to Professor Anton. Hopefully he's in the camera. Yeah, it's one of my cameras got a broken screen. But, whatever. It's one of my cameras, so stay in mind it's broken. It doesn't get resold. Resell this one when I'm dead, I think. Anyway, this is totally irrelevant. Alright, so he's on this subject again of like, I've done this before. Like, he asked this question, so I'll play the second half of his video. That somehow there is a higher moral initiative, no, wrong word, obligation, ethical obligation on atheists than there are on Christians for two reasons, I would argue. He's only mentions one. One is the fact that the Christians have the out that there's somebody else who's going to take care of it. Obviously, I think for the atheist, you have to concede that we're the smartest thing we know of in the universe. There's no real evidence there's something smarter than us. So, yeah, it falls on us, right? It falls on whoever's the smartest in the group to prevent the harm or to have the good ideas or to suggest the right way to go. That's the obligations of, that's responsibilities of intelligence, is that you are ultimately responsible. So, yeah, we're responsible. Everything we allow to happen happens because we allow it to happen, correct? Yes, correct. And if it's crap, then we have to account for that if we don't stop it. It seems reasonable. And the answer to it is, yeah, what do you want me to do, Professor? Exactly. And let's point out that every time somebody suggests something like vegetarianism, which is for him it doesn't mean anything, but for he calls it a food choice, food preference even, which is kind of a joke, because he has a built-in bigotry, a bias, and that's all there is to that. But yeah, so you can use your voice, you can use what influence you have on people to try to provoke and motivate them, and that's all you can do. And there's a percentage of atheists that do that. And what are you going to do with the ones who don't? Well, that's like arguing, like, why don't all kids graduate Kama laude or something? I mean, they're always going to be on this relative scale, and there's always going to be the relative freeloaders versus the people who work. And that's the way it's going to always be. And so, I don't know, I mean, it'd be nice if atheists were more like give-a-dammers, but there's a big, huge class of atheism. They're just running from religious persecution, and they have no agenda. They just want to get away from religious persecution, and they don't care about anything else. And there's plenty of religious people who don't care about anything. They don't even care about the crap they say they care about. And they quite obviously don't give a fuck about fetuses and all this other shit. They just care about getting in other people's business, telling them they can't have sex because their rules say they can't, so they don't want anybody else having liberties that they can't take advantage of. And that's what all this is, The average human character sucks, Professor. I don't know whether you know that or not, but that's my theory. Yeah, the average human being has no character. It is a selfish, small-minded, petty, resentful, words, full of all those 7 deadly sins. So anyway, play this shit.
Of a hypocrite if you don't really try to bring about social change in this world than some person who imagines that there will be an afterlife or that there will be retribution brought by a god or a divinity at some time.
Yeah, well, this afterlife thing, that's another tricky business, isn't it? It's not really an afterlife as I've heard it described, is it? I mean, short of, getting the Muhammad lottery ticket of, your harem, for, killing women and children on the other side of the battlefield or whatever. It's for his name, to, kill the cartoon drawers. Besides getting your virgins for doing that, what part of heaven has should have any appeal to me as anything called an afterlife? An afterlife doing what? Shaking hands? Watching what? Cricket on God TV? Well, what the fuck is it? I've never heard of these heavens described as any kind of afterlife. I've heard them described as worse than zombie life. I'd rather be a zombie than an angel. I mean, There's nothing in the description of heaven that I have any interest whatsoever in participating in. I have heard nothing about. I don't want to go rub some rubies on the outside of any fucking pearly gates. I really have no fucking interest. So again, there's no point in talking about an afterlife. There's no afterlife. There's after prison in puffy cloud silly land.
Elsewhere. So the question would be, A, could people really move the discussion away from the is there a God or is there not a God and move it into the is there life after death or not? And I'm going to say I don't think there is. And if you don't think...
Well, don't you understand how it's already we can't have the conversation in mixed company? You can't have a conversation about any kind of social change or doing anything productive in the environment of religious nuts. Because they're always just going to keep telling you what God says. They're going to keep saying, well, God says you can't do that, and God says you can't do that, and God says you can't do that. All right? So they're going to have all these rules that God doesn't allow us to interfere in God's plan. So what the fuck's the point of talking about the future with those idiots? You can't even say something rational like, oh, well, let's have some sort of... All right, some idiot who shall remain nameless forgot to check how much memory was left on the camera. Anyway, my bad. Yeah, so you can't really have a conversation with society about changing anything if we can't start with premises that anybody can agree to. And nobody can agree on these premises. So until we establish premises for where we are and what we're doing, all right, if you have people who are saying God says so, and then you have other people saying nature says so, you know, how do I argue with what nature says and what God says? They're not willing to have a rational conversation about what means something here and how to maximize the good and minimize the bad. And even you're not willing to have that conversation in a sense, because anything nature causes, any natural problem, is something you're just going to stoically sit there and accept that blowing of the wind. So why point your finger at other people's conversation? I can point my finger at your conversation and say you're the one who ain't getting it. You know, it's really about whether or not we even need to exist in the first place. And let's first find out what part of us is worth something, and maybe that would be worth preserving. But the whole game itself has so many rotten, crappy, stupid, idiotic elements that, yeah, if you did any kind of analysis in any kind of rational manner, it's going to demonstrate that. So, you know, if you're advocating for a rational conversation about sensible future planning for the human race, that's going to reveal, doing that at all seriously is going to reveal just how silly the whole thing is. That the easiest thing to do is just quit making people who never are satisfied. And they never really are they, Professor? Come on. I mean, the West has all the money and all this bullshit. Are they happy? No, they're on Prozac. They're cheating on their wives, their husbands. They're just as fucked up as they could fucking possibly be, and yet they have 100 to 1 superficial elements of life satisfied thing ahead of the people eating gruel right now. But they might as well both be in the same place, because they're both incapable of being satisfied. Because that's not what we're built to be. We're not built to be satisfied.
There is. Doesn't that mean that if you're an atheist, you're kind of more of a hypocrite if you fail to really actively try to bring about social justice in this world than someone who's religious? I'm not suggesting that religious people don't try to bring about social justice. I think there's lots of examples of Catholic social justice.
Well, that's a joke. So yeah, social justice cosmetically, right? Do what looks good. Make yourself look like a generous person. I mean, you should know enough about human psychology to realize that most of that crap is just that crap, just to make people feel good about the exploitation. You know, they'll pet the slaves every now and then, give them a little pat on the behind, say good job, and that's all that is. It's patronizing and it's self-serving. Most of the world's charity. And so, what are you doing? How are you holding somebody up to some other standard than just eking through their existence? Because they don't have the power. As individuals, we can do nothing about any big problems. Okay, the only way you solve the big problems is as collective or as some sort of, in power majority. Otherwise, there's not a hell of a lot we can do. Should I fly some planes into some buildings? What's the suggestion? But I tend to agree, though. Like I said, atheists do have this obligation, but we have to understand that most atheists are not atheists for any kind of rational reason. They're atheists because they look at religion and laugh and say, this is a silly story. And then they just turn the other way, but they don't write a new story.
The kinds of charity works that are done all around the globe in the name of religious faiths. But I guess I want to say that many of those people at least believe that there will be ultimate justice served somewhere else by some other person.
Do you really think they believe any of that crap? Most of them, you said most of them believe. Do you think most of them actually do believe? Do you think their behavior and the way they act indicates they have any faith or confidence whatsoever, any universal justice? Where do you see the Christians doing the forgive 70 times, 70 times? Where do you see them living up to the doctrine of their books and their ethics of their books? You see them cheating all over the place, doing a few Hail Marys and redoing the same crime all over again, saying I'm sorry, but they're not really. The fake repentance, come on. Their hypocrisy is glaring and grotesque. The hypocrisy of the atheist is not as glaring just because we haven't defined. Very few atheists have been willing to say that, yes, it's true. There is a logical default. Okay, you can reject all these other theories, but you've got to accept one. And the default theory is we evolved from these biological organisms, and we possess this thing called sentience, which makes us capable of being harmed. You can start with that simple default and grow out of that some sort of ethic that it's good to reduce the amount of harm that exists and to try to organize a social structure that has something to do with this concept of fairness. Fairness seems kind of a default, infinitely agreeable concept, that if you're going to have a game, it's better to have a fair game than an unfair game. I mean, those two opposites are pretty easy to always fall on the right side and vote for fairness. So, yeah, we should maybe work for some of that shit. Yeah, and so atheists should be able to get the concept of, yeah, I agree. They shouldn't be so fucking preoccupied with their, fornication and drug use that they should be once in a while able to turn their brain actually onto some kind of subject and say, I understand the word fair, I understand the word harm, I understand that we have to have systems in place that proportion harm and through a mechanism of fairness. Yeah, that makes sense.
People here who, again, I don't think, too, we're talking about ending natural disasters. I don't think that's, there's always going to be hardship.
Yeah, well, like I say, if you're going to take that off the table, okay, like setting ourselves up for them by completely overpopulating to a lot of other things that make us more vulnerable to natural disasters, by living in environments we shouldn't be living in, there's lots of ways you can fail safe existence. You can safety yourself from natural disasters. So again, just to sit there and say, that's off the table, it's bullshit. My second argument to you in this subject would be, well, to take that off the table is to take the substance, the 90% of the misery and suffering that humans incur is functionally a result of these biological instruments of disease and death. The very function of the mechanics is to spend us, is to use us up. The very nature of the male, you might even argue, is to be this expendable, excessively myopic passion organism, that's expendable, and they'll live an expendable life. And, but you can't take that off the table. That has to be part of the table. You're going to take that off the table. That's like taking the animals thing off the table. That substance of the pain and suffering and harm is being endured through those mechanisms. So why should I even bother worrying about the trifle that's left over, the 10%? If you're saying 80% of the problem is something we can stoically deal with, why can't you just stoically deal with that other 20%? The 20% being created by human-on-human damage. yeah, I mean, it's almost like nothing compared to.
Difficulties and, again, kinds of suffering beyond human control, but the kind of justice that can be brought about by human action.
Look, it's all under human controls. Let's understand that. It all is. This whole place exists because we're perpetuating it. Not, and if we as a collective decide not to, it's over. That's the truth of it. We have the power now. So it's via volition in that sense. It's in our control. All of it. Every bit of it.
By human dealings, it would seem that atheists, to the extent that they don't believe in life after death, are more subject to the claim of being hypocrites if they're not actively trying to bring it about.
Yeah, well, again, like I said, I don't think the Christians in the first place believe in their Bible. I think they're just as invested in their welfare of their kids as anybody else. But that's as far as people want to think. It's a little hard to, people will project their consciousness into these other things that are like them through the similarity mechanisms. And, he roots for my guy, he's for my team, so I'm for him, kind of thing. That networking, that connectioning thing, where we extend our welfare to these other beings and accept the burden of caring for them, worrying for them, as we would for ourselves. But yeah, we can see how irrational that is. It's all this subjective stuff. It's all this bullshit criteria that we decide that our empathy is allowed to flourish in us, and that it isn't something we do for principle, and we don't live life logically. And it's a huge liability. It's gigantic. And so again, I'm just going to say, point my finger at you and just say, well, what are you doing, Mr. Hypocrite? You're just sitting around suggesting everybody should be stoic. Just sit around, watch the parade. I mean, that's what you're suggesting when it comes to all the natural slop. Well, like again, if I'm going to sit around and watch that slop, why don't I just sit around and watch the human slop?
See some response on that. Thanks.
Okay. Yeah, it just feels like we've been there and done that. So again, first off, I guess it'd be nice if you people would name names. If you got a critique for somebody, I'd say a lot of the big name atheists aren't talking about anything that matters. They're just talking about, well, why aren't Christians listening to my rational arguments? Well, it's because they're not rational. They don't have rational standards for what they want to believe. And it's about what they want to believe, not what's logical. So you're already in big trouble. They function on this level of faith and, believe for the sake of it almost. So, but again, you're not going to make, I don't think you can make the common bums of atheism are still a level of hypocrisy lower, at least one level, maybe many more levels lower in terms of hypocrisy than the average Christian or the average Muslim, who has nothing, and who is completely, they're sacrificing at the altar of their God other people's liberty. They won't sacrifice anything of their own. No, they'll sacrifice somebody else's right to invest in their fucking judgment, but they won't sacrifice their right not to beat up their wife or, abuse their children or all this other crap they defend. So, sorry. No sale on big hypocrite contention. The bigger hypocrisy is always going to be with the theists who don't have any faith in their faith philosophy, their philosophy of faith, and who demonstrate none of it. And I would agree, it'd be nice if more atheists, were something other than selfish, small-minded, nihilist-style gluttons. But, it'd be nice, but that's all. That's just all you can say. The fact that the default human condition is asshole is unfortunately still a fact.